Welcome to the Huntington. This evening we are delighted and honored to have as our guest speaker Dr. James Folsom, the director of the Botanical Gardens here at the Huntington. Jim Folsom's been with the Huntington for more than 30 years. He received his bachelor's degree from Auburn University, master's degree from Vanderbilt University, and his PhD from the University of Texas. As the curator of the Botanical Gardens at the Huntington, he dedicates much of his efforts to educational programs which increase public interest and understanding of science, culture, and the history of plants and gardens. He actually oversees over 70 staff members and more than 100 volunteers here at the Huntington. Some of the notable projects that he's been involved with recently: Helen and Peter Bing Children's Garden in 2004, the Chinese Garden in 2008, and the Huntington Ranch in 2010. Jim was presented with the Professional Citation by the American Association of Botanical Gardens and Arboreta in 1999, and in 2007 he was awarded the Garden Club's of America's Medal of Honor. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Jim Folsom.
Let's see. PowerPoint. Okay. Hey, I know more than half the people in this room. That is so cool. It really strikes me. This is home. When I look out and I know everybody almost, and those who I don't, I probably do. I just forgot. So welcome to the Huntington. Some of you might not have been in our new kind of replacement for Friends Hall. We also have a really lovely big lecture hall over there. So it's a real change for us, and we've already gotten so accustomed to it, I've forgotten what was here before, kind of. Tonight, I thought it would be fun to talk to you about something that actually, you, in some areas, like, it's kind of embarrassing to have John here because you probably know more than I do, but I'm going to talk to you about what makes the Huntington interesting and unique as far as its history, its natural history goes, which also is what makes where we are, where we live, kind of interesting and unique. So we're going to walk through the natural history and the built history of the Huntington, but at the same time, it's the natural history and the built history of San Marino. So I think it might be fun, and let's just, it's kind of interesting. I've never taught in a room where I'm parenthetical, so somehow or another we have to make the lights, do they go down? Is that what happens? I don't have that button. So I was advised to tell you that one really fascinating thing was that my table mate here, Frank, and I are the only people in the room who have children who are professional dancers, sort of. I was told I had to do that. His kids are both like international quality competitive ballroom dancers. I was blown away because I know how many hours that means driving back and forth to all those studios. And I also know what it means for him is every year now, the middle school and the high school play will have to be altered so there's a dance scene. Is that right? Okay, so let's go into this. So we're going to start with natural history. We're going to start with a larger picture: geography, geology, topography. Of course, when you live in California, you are more thoughtful about the world's plates, the tectonic plates, than anybody else's, because we sit on the very edge of the continent. I mean, on the edge in many, many ways. And the whole shape of the state is a product of that big thing called the San Andreas Fault, which is a product of the Pacific Plate and the North American Plate not behaving very well, running into each other. And what's really curious, of course, is that I can't point at this and make it happen. I have two different screens, so I don't know which one to point at. But what's really curious is the American plate's going faster than the Pacific plate. So in a few million years, if you happen to be around and watch it, Hawaii is coming this way, and it's going to get scraped off on California like everything else has. If you read that John McPhee book about California, you know, the ranges are kind of like they've been scraped off over time. And those islands, you know, in a few billion years, they will be here. So buy property there on the far side. Of course, it's the plates are responsible for huge tectonic features, and the big feature that no one thinks much about, you know, the Great Wall is in China, but the greatest wall is the mountain chain that starts in Alaska and goes all the way to the tip of South America. It affects weather patterns on the whole globe. It's such a major aspect of a globe. And we have two versions of it. We have the coastal mountains, and then, of course, a little bit more inland, we have the Rockies. But that is part of who we are, is the presence of those mountains. And it creates this kind of interesting geomorphic state where we have the coast ranges and then that funny little light blue thing called the transverse ranges. And you can proudly tell people that there aren't many mountain chains. It's like rivers that go north, you know. There aren't many mountain chains that run east-west. And the transverse ranges are there. But you need to think about that for a second, because they do that courtesy of the same function that causes the San Andreas Fault to exist. That dogleg in the San Andreas Fault is also responsible for the whole shape of California and for that transverse range thing. And of course, we're sitting right in it. That point that says transverse ranges on there, right below the end of that point, that's where you are sitting right now. There you are. So we are just we're at the bottom of the transverse ranges, or the southern end of the transverse ranges, and just on the other side of Whittier, we're getting into the peninsular ranges. So here we are in this on the slopes of this mountain in this Los Angeles basin. Let's look at it a little bit more. And what the Los Angeles basin really is almost is a delta. It's almost a delta. It's a dry delta, right? But it's a delta because the Los Angeles River and the San Gabriel River kind of run out almost together, and we're between those two in a very funny way. We'll look at that in a second. So we're also in a really interesting place on the planet. We are just above the 34th meridian, the 34th parallel. Now, who else is on the 34th parallel? A lot of folks. Kabul, Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, all those people, all those soldiers right now in that part of the world are having exactly the same day, set apart a few minutes, you know, but the exact same day as we're having, as do the people in Morocco, the people in Atlanta, Georgia, just north of Atlanta, Georgia, the people where the Tallahatchie Bridge is, that, what's his name? Remember that? You know, that age? Billy Joe McAllister. Yeah. It runs just below Tupelo, where Elvis Presley was born. And it runs through Xi'an, China, and it runs right through Hiroshima. So the 34th parallel, it's an interesting parallel. It has a lot to say about the world and a lot of things, and we're right there on the 34th parallel. And we're in the San Gabriel Valley, okay? So here we are in freeway settings, and you all know the history of the 210, which they were all right. When they opened it the rest of the way, it got more crowded. They were right. So here we are, and then we're in a funny place, because we are in the San Gabriel River Valley, except the Eaton Wash, John help me, does a funny thing. It joins with the Rio Hondo, and then it leaves it again, and it gives up on San Gabriel, and it becomes a part of the Los Angeles River over near Whittier. So we're in this funny drainage basin, and everything that, it's like the continental divide. You know, if you go out there and pour some water out, eventually those drops are supposed to go somewhere. They're going to end up not in the San Gabriel River. They're going to end up in the Los Angeles River. And we are between the Alhambra Wash and the Rubio Wash. That's where, and so San Marino services those two washes. We're also in another funny place. We are, in 5 minutes, if we got up and walked down to the bottom of the hill, you could be standing on the Raymond Hill earthquake fault. Okay? The trace. There are two traces that run through the bottom of the property. That earthquake fault helps define something called a perched water basin. Because of the discontinuities in strata, we have a gift, which is a perched basin of water called the Raymond Basin. It's famous. It is the first water basin, the first water district in all of the North America that was adjudicated. All the case law for water in North America starts with this basin. And I don't know in your lifetime, in my lifetime, but in our children's lifetime, every water district in North America will be adjudicated. And they will all have been adjudicated based on settlements that started right here in the Pasadena, San Marino area. I think that's fascinating. And not many people know that. I don't know much about law, but I know that's really neat. Okay, now what you need to know is that the foxes do guard the hen house, because the people who run the basin are the people who own membership in the basin. But we're very careful about that, and we're very, very conservative. Now, the basin is divided into all these sub-areas, but I want to show you something else that's fun about it. We're at the very bottom. That green line defines the basin across the bottom of the map, that green, which defines basically the presence of that fault. And the Huntington is at the bottom of the basin, which means that we get probably the best water of anybody. I mean, there's plenty, the water's building up. It also means that when we've drilled 2 new wells here since I've been here, we have gone 800 feet deep on both wells and never hit bedrock. So you drive around and you see Eagle Rock sticking out, and you think, well, we're sitting on bedrock. Well, we are, but it's 800 or 900 feet deep. It's a long way to Tipperary. Okay, so we're sitting on, where we're really sitting on is talus, is different, like lasagna, different strata off the mountain is very coarse, and some of it's very fine, depending on how active mountain building has been. And you say, mountain building? Yes, this is one of the fastest growing mountain chains on the face of the planet. Like a millimeter a year. Now that's not fast, but it's fast in geological time. And in some earthquakes, the mountains in our area have gone up several feet. So it means that we mapped the Huntington on computer-aided design. We haven't transitioned from the 1927 map, and every so often they put together a new standard. We've been so involved in projects that I have not wanted to transition from the 27 to a more recent map, but all the maps have to be coordinated back to one standard because everything moves. You don't think about that, but things keep moving in both in elevation and XY. So you can map something on the Huntington, but to coordinate it with the rest of California is a trick. It costs a lot of money to do that. People make good money doing this. So now let's talk a little bit about moving from tectonics to, so of course the sun is the center, I think only in astronomy are people not the center of the universe. So in the sun is at the center, we're spinning around it, we're at the 34th parallel, and it generates this kind of a temperature flux. And so if you look, you can barely see, and I can't point at it very well, you can barely see that California coast is in that, is in the tan, kind of that orange, pumpkin colored area, okay? Which you can see how it flows up and down the oceans. Put a spin to that, and you get this global set of circumstances that are predictable. And what's cool about that is that you can predict where the world's climates are going to be. So that you could take the continents and move them all around and have the same Earth, and you could predict where each kind of climate will be based on the fact that the sun is always in a certain position, the Earth is spinning at a certain speed, and the Earth is rotating around the sun in a year. So you can always know, for example, that, I don't know if this shows up, you can always know that on the west side of continents, on the west between about 30 and 45 degrees north or south, that you're going to get a Mediterranean climate. You're going to get one in the Mediterranean, one in California, one in Chile, Australia, and the tip of South Africa. You can also know that you're going to get a monsoonal climate in the eastern part of continents. The southeastern US has the same climate as southeastern Asia. And that is something that's predictable based on how the Earth works. Okay, so what does that mean for us? That means we're Mediterranean. And it means that we get to make these cool charts that are reverse every other chart in the front of your atlas if you still use an atlas. This is old, this is analog technology. I actually took the atlas and opened it and took a picture. Okay? Historically, I would have made a Xerox on a big machine and then cut it out, and I would have been passing out pieces of paper. So what this is showing is it's showing two parameters. The blue is rainfall patterns, and the tan is heat. And so what of course qualifies us as Mediterranean, besides where we are on the planet, is the fact that we and 4 other zones in the world uniquely have hot, dry summers and cool to cold but moderate winters with rain. So what makes California almost all Mediterranean, equivalent to a chunk of Chile, equivalent to the Mediterranean, is the fact that our rainfall comes during the cool season and the summer is hot and dry. That means a lot. It means that plants from all those Mediterranean zones are pre-adapted. They automatically do well here. Eucalyptus, oleander before it got the scorch, olive, all the plants from any Mediterranean zone automatically do well here because they come from a biome that's exactly the same as ours. That's kind of that, and that says a lot about the landscape around us. Another curious thing, of course, is we have June gloom, and we have that cold water coming down the Pacific, and that also impacts our climate. Further north, of course, it makes the fogs that allow us to have the tallest trees on the face of the planet. So we look at that. This is a little bit, this is our more recent experience. So the red, it's that same pattern. If you use a calendar year, which the water people don't, but if you use a calendar year, our rainiest months are January and February, and then it dries out March, April, May, it's getting lower. June, July, August, hardly anything unless you plan a wedding and it will rain. It is guaranteed. If you plan a big expensive party on July the 5th, it is going to rain. And then it starts raining again, and our first rain is usually after about the 15th of October. This year has been really unusual so far, and we're hoping it'll stay that way and continue to rain. Of course, the big thing is the bottom line. It doesn't show there. The bottom line is last year's rainfall. So you know the story there. We'll get there in a second. This shows rainfall from 2000, our rainfall each year in the rain year, which is July to July. So one characteristic of California's rainfall is it's erratic. I mean, we had a year, 2004, when we got 56 inches of rain. And then I remember the year with 3. I was thinking, I guess it never does rain in California. And so it's not, it's if it were an even rain, it would be a very different climate, but it's highly erratic. And it's erratic over history. So going back 2,000 years, we have seen worse. Just take that in for a second. So if we only have a 4-year drought, we are very fortunate. It's not impossible to have a much more extended drought. If you go back and look at the records, the first half of the 20th century, we averaged about 8 to 10 inches more a year than the second half. We got to thinking of ourselves as living in a place where it rained 20 to 24 inches a year, and all of a sudden we now think of ourselves as a place where it rains 14 inches a year. And for the last 4 years, we think of ourselves as a place where it rains under 10 inches a year, which qualifies as a desert. Okay. So another thing that makes us different from almost any friends, if you've gardened in another part, Frank's from New York, where it's just cold in the winter, you know. But if you've gardened or have family who garden in another part of the world, if you are in North Dakota, you're in one zone. It doesn't make any difference if you're on the north side of a rock or the south side of the rock. When it's minus 20, it's cold. But here, we're so close to frost-free that the sunset guide for California has to make like 20-something climate zones, because it really matters exactly where you are. We have, we'll talk about that in a second, but even in your own yard it might matter. You might have friends, it might be a good freeze for you, and they might have had no freeze at all, just a couple of miles away, because they might be up on a slope or at the top of a hill or protected in some way. So that makes California different too. And of course, now we're going to get into some more kind of local stuff. So another thing is, here we're looking at the median rainfall. What does that mean for a garden? Well, that means that we water in the summer. So you're looking here just at the red is our water usage in 2004, average from 2000 to 2014, because we plant all these different kinds of plants and we have issues. Let's go look at some more particular things. If you ran a line north-south through the garden, that line right there, starting at the Allen Gate and going down to Houston, if you run that line, this is the topography of the garden. So where you are right now is right about there. And then we have that drop-off, which is the scarp, the exposure of the earthquake fault. Okay? It makes a lot of difference in the property. One of the curiosities, of course, is that slope is south-facing. That changes everything, too. A south-facing slope is very different from a north-facing slope. If you run a line through the property from over at Avondale and go all the way over to the Oxford Gate, then this is the topography. We have a canyon on our that goes into the Alhambra Wash on the far west, and then the canyon that is the place for the Japanese and Chinese gardens, which is nice because it gives us some topography. A big issue, especially for our friends downhill, is drainage. So the property basically, of course, drains from north to south because that's the way the topography works. But if you look, if you happen to live in Pasadena, right in here, all of your drainage water comes right through our property and comes through the Japanese and Chinese gardens. 180 acres drain into the Chinese garden. It was a lot of effort to design the Chinese garden to absorb all of that rainfall in a flood. We will find out what happens. Okay. And all the water on the property, everything that happens here is different from your lives in a way. We're in two drainages. All the water on the west side of the property drains into the Alhambra Wash, and all the water on the east side of the property goes into the Rubio Wash, which is true of San Marino too. We are also on the line between two mosquito abatement areas. So we get visited by two different mosquito abatement officers all summer long. If you look down that slope, this is what the property looked like when Huntington first started developing it. From the house site to what was the reservoir, that row of palms still exists, most of them. And that was the entrance to the Shorb Estate. So the Shorb Estate was lined with palms. A couple of those palms are still down on San Marino. So when you come up San Marino, which turns into Sierra Madre, that was the railroad track, right? That was why that exists. And you'll see a couple of California fan palms that I think are the residual of that original planting. So looking from that pond, which is the bottom of the desert garden today, back up the hill, we filled that in the 20s. It used to be, it was a reservoir. We filled it in. One of the things we have to worry about is drainage off of the property. So just to the east out here, we put these huge tanks underground to help abate the peaks in a storm, because in the modern world, we're responsible for water leaving the property. It can't be any more than it was before construction, and it can't be any dirtier. And that's true of all of us, any projects we do. The Chinese garden, of course, I told you about all the water issues there. We had to design the Chinese garden to absorb the flow of 180 acres of drainage. Those topographies make a difference in your life and make a difference in ours, because cold air flows like water. It's heavy and it flows like in a stream. So the bottom of the property is colder than the top. In that last big freeze we had ice on the ground by the lily ponds for 3 solid days. You don't think of that as California, but we had it. And because we have a cold air flow that comes through the canyon that is the Japanese and Chinese gardens, that's why those gardens were there in the first place. Huntington grew peaches, because on this property he could grow peaches and oranges. That's bizarre. I mean, nobody else in the world does that except Californians. So let's look at the faults for a second. So we have our faults, and the Hollywood. So we have the Raymond fault. You can see it right in the middle of the picture there. What does that mean? Well, I always wonder about. I don't know how the rest of you cope with this, but I will tell you that there is this big map of the state, and on it is every known earthquake trace, which is where the fault is visible on the surface. And there is a state-mandated setback in which you cannot build. So going right through the middle of San Marino is a line, and you cannot build within 30 feet of that, 300 feet of that line on either side. If you notice, the whole art gallery is inside that line. Today, we would not be allowed to build the art gallery where it sits. Now, it may not, I don't know if it applies to private residences, it applies to occupiable space. So, for example, I don't know how the high school got built there. I just wonder, maybe it was grandfathered in or something. Schools have they go by different rules.
I'll tell you actually, Jim, the foundation for the main building
Yes.
actually had to be the equivalent of what would normally be a 14-story structure, so because of that fault.
Okay, so you guys were able to mitigate it by building a bigger foundation.
That's what I understand.
Wow. Well, I can tell you, we had to do a funny thing. So we wanted to build the new Desert Conservatory. That blue line is that line that's defined by the state, the AP boundary limit. The thing inside the limit is the existing Desert Conservatory, which is a 100 by 30 glass house. We want to replace that and build a new one. So we went and talked to the state and all the permit people, and we found out that what you have to do is dig a 20-foot deep trench across the whole line. See that yellow line that's the trench, says trench. And then you have to see if you find another fault. Okay, and now this is the trick. If you find another fault, then you have to step back 50 feet. And I'm thinking, really? 50 feet makes all the difference in a world? In an earthquake fault? But that's the law. So that meant that that we had this thing, and so the line was where the line is, and we found another fault when we dug the trench, and so we stepped back 50 feet, and that's why the building that we hope to replace the Desert Conservatory with someday is designed and positioned exactly as it is, so that it is 1 foot behind the 50-foot setback. So let's look at the property for a second, the built history of the property. Huntington paid $250,000 for 508 acres in 1903. Those of you in real estate will recognize land was never cheap here. That was a lot of money in 1903. A few years later, he acquired that. That was the original plot. You can see it there. The yellow is today's boundary. And then you can see on the left the piece that is the little canyon that I showed you on the map. He acquired that later. By a few years later, he owned most of San Marino. He owned half of South Pass, and he really owned and developed a lot of land here. So when he bought it, you can see where the Shorb House was. You can see a reservoir which served the orange groves down to Huntington Drive and below. That's the one we saw with the palms by it. And the train tracks that go up San Marino and then form Sierra Madre. Okay, and you know that just under one of those arrows, right to the right of the word that says reservoir, right above it, see the train spur? That was the train spur that came on the property, and he had a train barn on the property. It was very convenient. When we decided to expand the desert garden to the bottom, they just sent trains to Mexico and Arizona and just dug up cacti and then brought it. They came back all the way here on a train. I miss my train. That was the Shorb House first. They must have done well one year because they decided to tart it up and make it a little. Look, it's the same house. Watch. So they added the mansards. It must have been all in vogue or something. So that's the Shorb House that Huntington bought. And he visited there. We have pictures of him on the porch with the Shorb family in the 1890s. And from that house, looking back down over the orange groves, the reservoir. And now from the reservoir, looking back at the house as it was being built, and you can see the desert garden to the right, just having been planted. And then from way down closer to Huntington Drive, when this house was built, it was the largest house in California. It remained the largest house in California until the Spielberg Mansion. It's 48,000 square feet. It has a basement and a big attic. So. He had built a house. He built homes for his children, and he built a guest house on the property with the idea that maybe Archer would come visit. Archer never came and visited. So that home was eventually moved. It was just nearby here, and it was moved eventually to become the president's home. The canyon became the Japanese garden, so that's the early Japanese garden. So by 1921, his estate was pretty much intact. If you look at the circle on the upper left, that's where the mausoleum is today. It was not there. It was not built. It was not finished until after his death. But you can see in this aerial the flagpole, which was a gift. Can you imagine getting a gift? Getting a telegram, we are delivering a gift for you. It's a 148-foot flagpole. It is, it's all wood, and it's down at San Pedro. You may pick it up at your earliest convenience. My predecessor had to bring a flagpole with wagons from San Pedro to here, crossing everybody's property. He had to get permission to cross all the property. He could not take a right turn very easily. So this is the property, and in that diagram you see the art gallery, you see the library, you see the desert garden, the rose garden, what was the cut flower garden is the herb garden today, and tucked in the far left is the Japanese garden. All of that was present. He died in 27, and we became a public institution. So a lot had to happen. Before we opened, they closed for about 6 months. We had to build public restrooms. All the chimneys were taken out, and the chimneys on top of the art gallery were fake. They were taken out so that you wouldn't have an earthquake problem, because they were all brick. So that was all dismantled. A lot of changes took place in the first few years of the institution to make it ready for the public. This is the survey, one of the surveys that was done in 1927. As Huntington died, they were just then developing the property around us. That street, which is today Oxford, had not existed 5 or 7 years before that. So they were in the final, he had finally decided the shape of the property, and then he developed all of those big properties around the Huntington. That all happened at the very time he died. So it's very curious timing. By 1930, of course, the mausoleum was finished. We were open to the public. And this was the layout that had been achieved. So here we are with properties around the Huntington. None of those properties on the eastern border had been worked out until the last 5 or 10 years. So the whole rest of the shaping of San Marino takes place in a very short time. About the time this club was founded, which is 90 years old this year, I understand. So they added a central plant and took all the air conditioning, all the heating out of the art gallery so they wouldn't have any fires in the basement of the art gallery. A lot took place by 1935. Moved the house, which is now the president's house. Our first traffic congestion. We had to build parking lots. You know the history of that better than I do. Since the time we opened to the public, we probably had over 30 million visitors. Because we receive around 500,000 or 600,000 visitors a year. Adds up pretty fast. You used to have reservations. It even snowed twice. Does anybody, that was in the 50s, does anybody remember that? We have pictures of the staff out making snowballs and snowmen.
January 12th.
January 12th? Wow! Okay. So let's just do a summary and bring it up to date. But this is really part of your lives too, because it implies everything we've done here, I hope, is a fallout of what could be done here. So the shore branch of this property, and you can see there were 2 reservoirs where the Japanese and the Chinese gardens are today. The car barn and all that stuff was here. So by 1908, Huntington had developed the Rose Garden to the west, the North Vista to the north, the Desert Garden, and the Palm Garden, it doesn't show in the lily ponds, and had sited the house and started building the house. And then by 1914, the house was built, the Palm Drive entrance was built, and the Japanese garden had been constructed. 1919, we're coming up on our 100th anniversary. So in 1919, the first deed of trust was written. It was changed in 1925-26. That's the deed of trust we operate under. The good thing for me was in the first deed of trust, it was a library, art gallery, and park. In the second one, it was a library, art gallery, and botanical garden. In 2 words, it changed the entire future and past now, but future of this institution. If you wonder what words mean. 27, Huntington dies. By 34, we built our first parking lot, which was a failure. You know that story better than I do. And the gardens continue to grow. By 1981, we have that big parking lot that, and the Friends Hall complex. And this is what's scary to me. When I came here, that was brand new. We just tore it down because it was worn out. Does not make me feel very good. So, then more development with the expansion of the library, with the Munger, the Scott Gallery, the renovation of the garage, Mr. Huntington's garage, built in 1911 to be the Boone Gallery. In my lifetime here, also the Chinese Garden, the Botanical Center. So that brings us to kind of today, and this is going to be hard to see, but this is the most recent aerial taken in February. We take an aerial every year of the gardens, and so you're here in, that's the red roof is the auditorium, you're right here in this building, and this whole new 6-acre complex of gardens is brand new. It opened in April. So So that's where we are, and that's our current state. And I think the best thing to do is let you guys go because you didn't have coffee. But also to say, anybody have any questions? Yes, ma'am. Huntington Drive is not in that picture. It would be, let's see. It's going to be hard here. This is Houston. And so Huntington would be down here somewhere.
Thank you.
Yeah. This is Oxford, Orlando, and then the Avondale Circle here. And of course, this part of the property backs up on every street in the world. It's funny. If there are neighbors here, I can walk from this house to that house, but I have to drive 2 miles to go from the front door of one to the other because of all those streets that dead end back there off of Oak Grove Circle. Any more?
James,
Yeah.
what about the undeveloped property on the west side?
Well, it's not so undeveloped anymore, but we have 200 acres, 207 if you count. We have a reservoir in Pasadena, by the way. Yeah. See that circle right there at the top? Okay, that is not the Sunny Slope one. That one's further down by Polytechnic. That's our reservoir. Because that's it. When you come down Hill Street, the dead end of Hill Street, 1 block past Caltech, that's our reservoir in Pasadena. So all the garden's water is shipped to Pasadena to be blessed. and then it comes back. So because Huntington used to own up to California. So he developed all of it.
Jim, have you lost many trees with the drought?
Yes.
You've been,
I could give you another sadder lecture about the number of trees we're all losing. It's not just the drought. The trees are stressed because of the drought, but we have a lot of new enemies of trees, polyphagous shot-hole borers and things. We've lost hundreds and hundreds of trees. I have more mulch than I wish I had. Yeah. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Share the relationship with UCR and how that's going to affect the Huntington.
The UCR people have been fabulous. They've got some of the greatest researchers in the world out there. The polyphagous shot-hole borer started down near the port. It must have come in on materials in the port. And it was kind of quiet until after the big windstorm and then the drought. So it wasn't really understood or given much attention until about 3.5 years ago when, after the windstorm here at the Arboretum, we noticed that we were losing trees to that insect, and UC Riverside got involved. In the 3 years since they have gotten involved in that, they have completely sequenced all of its genetics. They have described it as a new species. They have gone to Vietnam and Taiwan and found it in the wild. They have, in the most recent trip, found a cannibalizing wasp that we hope might be one of the ways to control it. Something that would have taken 30 years before has all happened in 3.5 years. It's amazing how much work they put into it. And they would have been faster if the government had passed the Farm Bill and not held them up for 2 years. So, yeah.
would you describe what's going on the Oxford Road and?
Oh, yeah. So, we got held up. We promised the neighbors we'd replant the whole perimeter. And so we planted the Orlando perimeter before, but we promised them we would not do that until we finished this building because there was too much disruption. That we have taken out all that material because it was partly oleander, which is all dying. And we're going to put in the Netafim, the new drip irrigation, deal with the soil. We're going to lower the soil a little bit so there's not runoff off the curb. It will be planted to Calistema Littlejohn, which is a nice plant, and some trees. Certainly we're going to have an El Nino. We decided to stop for about a few weeks, and on the property we have to clean all the curbs, we have to prepare everything for good rainfall. So as soon as we get past getting that, we'll come back out there. That'll all be planted before the end of the calendar year.
Does the Huntington own any other properties in San Marino?
In San Marino, no. We own a house I think it's in Pasadena. It's over just a block from Caltech. And we own a house a home in Chapman Woods. And I have a friend in Virgin Islands who wants to give us his botanical garden. But he's crazy, and he won't tell me how big it is. And I can't convince the trustees that we could use a nice retreat kind of botanical garden. So,
Is the EBC California garden, a
Okay.
Mediterranean garden? Talk about
so the question is the EVC a California? We call it the Brody California Garden. It is a garden. Our idea was there are many gardens that would be perfect for where we are, that would be beautiful, lush, interesting, exciting, and sustainable. Lower water, lower maintenance, lower green waste. All those things count. And so this is one expression of that. It is a version of a garden we think that's a lot of fun, interesting botanically, and a perfect garden for where we are. It is not just native plants. It's mostly Mediterranean, including a lot of natives. So it's not, we didn't attempt to build a native plant garden, but there's a lot of natives in there. So, yeah.
Do you collaborate with Brook Green Gardens at all?
We collaborate with everybody, except what happens is we have so much to do here that we stay pretty busy here, but we tend to be very, one thing, you know this better than I do, one thing about living in Los Angeles County is everybody is your friend, because everybody gets stuck at LAX for 6 hours sometime in their lives. We don't get to all those places, but by gosh, they all come here. We know everybody in the world. I'm telling you, a week does not pass that some notable people, wonderful people that we want to meet, come and spend some time with us. So we're in a great place. We're very international. I don't know if that comes across. This is a very international garden with a huge Pacific Rim component. Anybody else? We have lots of friends. I was talking today about a relationship in Korea. We have huge relationships in China. We have a sister garden in Japan. So we have a sister garden in Singapore, and we have a garden that we collaborate with in Namibia. So this is a very international garden. It makes sense, doesn't it? Okay, thank you very much.